Welcome to Open Stutter. I'm Vivian Siskin, and I'm here today with my longtime friend, somebody I've been wanting to chat with for a really, really long time. We finally made it happen, Janet Givens. And I'll tell you a little bit about Janet right up front. She's from Northern New Jersey. She has both a bachelor's and a master's degree in sociology, and she spent 4 years in a doctoral program in political science. Obviously, did not want to stay with that. We'll hear more about that. She worked for nonprofits for 25 years and then became a certified Gestalt psychotherapist. In 2004, she entered the Peace Corps. And these days, Janet is a writer and psychotherapist in Danville, Vermont. She's the author of 3 books, which I hope she talks about during this time together. And she has a blog, which is janetgivens.com. And I learned something new when I looked at the blog recently, Janet. I learned a few things. One, that you were a tenor and mezzo-soprano, which I didn't know. And something else I learned too was that she tries to embrace her inner bitch at least once a day.
She's very important to me.
That's great. So welcome, Janet. It's great to have you here. We've been wanting to do this for a long time. So let's kick it off by just what's your recollection of when we met, since we're old friends here?
Oh, I remember it vividly. I remember sitting across a table from you in Charleston, Sid 4, I'm pretty sure. And I had sought you out because I wanted to meet this Vivian Siskin that I kept hearing about from clients, from sort of mutual clients. And we had lunch, and I remember laughing like constantly with you. You are the friend that can bring me to laughter the most easily.
Oh.
And we took a walk around Charleston. I remember that, and it was very, very hot. And I took care of that for myself, and I remember that you didn't.
Do reveal.
Too bad we don't have the picture.
Thank goodness. Know, yeah. As I remember, Janet was sort of dancing in a fountain, a public fountain. Was that sort of what you were doing?
It was a public fountain in which other people had been frolicking also, I think. It was a public, or did I have to sneak in? I remember I did have to climb over a little barrier, but it was so refreshing. Yeah. It really was.
And I do remember having so much fun that day. We had a lot of fun that day. Yeah. And that whole time that we met down in
and we agreed on so much, which was important back then.
Yeah. So let's go back in time a little bit, because I think that we were trying to figure out when that Charleston was. We think it's somewhere around 2000. We don't know for sure.
It was 2000.
Yeah, it was 2000.
We do know for sure.
Yeah. So
I'm convinced you helped me narrow it. It was 2000.
2000. Yeah. Who remembers yesterday, right? I don't even remember yesterday. But I would love to talk a little bit about, so even before Charleston, I did know a little bit about you, and of course about Woody. And Janet has not spoken about her husband yet, but I hope she does, Woody Starkweather. Very well-known academic, researcher, and big influencer in the stuttering community. Was at Temple University for many years. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about Stutt-L, right? We might have people listening who remember Stutt-L.
And I have to also say, Woody, when we used to give talks together, he would always introduce himself as the normally disfluent speaker. I would introduce myself as the person who stuttered, and he would say, and I'm the normally disfluent speaker, kind of. So I always liked that. He started Stutt-L before I knew him, so which was actually how we met, was because of Stutt-L. I think we've decided he started it in either 88 or 89. It was right after he came back from a year doing research on a Fulbright in Holland, in the Netherlands. And he did it to sort of bring stuttering researchers together to talk about what they were researching. And it quickly evolved into a place where people who stuttered could meet and talk, converse, speak their minds, debate, all kinds of things, and learn from one another. And we had speech therapists on there also. And I joined on my birthday in 1993. And Woody, as the head of Stutt-L, saw that I had joined. And so he wrote me off list to say, please introduce yourself. So I did. I introduced myself. I was sitting in my house in Ohio at the time. And I said, but I'm not from Ohio. I'm from East Orange, New Jersey. And so he wrote me immediately off list to say, I'm from East Orange, New Jersey. And there we went from there. So we had an off list conversation going on, as well as the on list Stutt-L conversation. And then we met a few months later, and then I moved to Philadelphia a few months after that. And we got married about 5 years later.
Yeah. Which is a quick story there.
That's right.
One thing I loved about Stutt-L, and I was on there too. I didn't post as much as others. I think I was learning and listening. What I loved about this was before social media. I mean, today, if somebody's listening, they say, what's the big deal where people who stutter can be in the same forum as researchers and clinicians? It was pretty much the first time where we had this listserv, this forum.
The listserv. Who has listservs anymore?
Yeah. But it was a forum with threads where everybody had a voice. And so it was so interesting. And then from that community, the characters sort of evolved. You know what I'm talking about.
The personalities came out.
Personalities. Yeah. It was really an interesting time and a place where you can actually, people were able to speak their mind and talk about ideas that were different. People got into arguments. Not that.
And Woody was extremely good. I always thought at keeping things civil, at sort of cutting somebody off if we sensed they were sort of going off the deep end, sort of bringing them back. He was very good at that. Yeah, I think that's what made it work. Yeah, really, you've always thought, but then I'm biased, So
how did you find Stutt-L? Sitting in Ohio, were you involved in stuttering communities? Were you looking for something like that?
John Harrison from the National Stuttering Project at the time told me about Stutt-L. I had gone to my first NSP conference. That was in 92. No, must have been 93. And I wanted to learn about stuttering. I had finally become curious about first my stuttering and then stuttering in general. And I was like a dry sponge. I wasn't working at the time. I had stopped being in the PhD program. So I had some time on my hands. It was a wonderfully serendipitous time for all this to come together. I had time. And I had, when I was 42 in 1992, was I 42 in 1992? I don't know. I didn't do the math, but
that's not.
I had come out of the closet, as we like to say, and decided to actually own this thing that had steered my life for such a long time. And embrace it essentially as part of me, just part of me, as though I had a limp, or back then I thought of it as something that I would rather not have, but it was part of me. And so I was going to accept it. Since then, I've come to appreciate kind of how it served me and what it taught me over the years. So I came out of the closet. I was curious. I was reading. I went to NSP conference. I met people that talked about stuttering. I wore the button. Sometimes I had to wear it low because I was still a little. Other times I wore it high.
Remind people what the button said.
This particular button said, "If you stutter, you're not alone." That particular one.
Yeah.
It was interesting when I was wearing it high. I remembered mentioning to my friend Amy Johnson was some people might remember her from NSA conferences. She was a good friend of mine back in my Ohio days. she gave me the button and told me how to wear it. But I remember telling her that I noticed if I wore the button high, like in a grocery store, people didn't talk to me. They didn't say hi. They didn't even make eye contact. If I didn't show it, it was down low, then I got a hello, how are you? It was like they were afraid to speak to me. So that was, I have no idea. It's one anecdote,
That's hysterical. That might bring us to talking about advertising a little bit later. Yeah. But, I'm very interested in how you got to that point where you said you decided to come out of the closet. So back up a little bit and bring us to the little bit from the beginning of the story. What was it like for you? I know going back in time now, we're going back even more years, but talk about maybe what it was like for you growing up, stuttering, some of the things that you remember, how it maybe shaped your experience as a person who stutters. Yeah.
It drove my bus is what it always did. And I don't know that I stuttered all that often. I was mostly a covert stutterer, hiding it as well as I could, not as well as I did after I see, I have to think about who I want to involve in this, like who's actually going to listen to this from my life, from the past, and say, oh my God, did she talk about that? But that's okay. I am, so it drove my bus. I remember things like I had my choice between nursing school at Columbia University or nursing school at Cornell University. And I chose Cornell because to get into Columbia, I had to take child psychology in this pre-thing I was in. And to pass child psychology, I would have to give a formal presentation. So I went to Cornell. That didn't require child psychology. My kids would probably say I really missed something important. But anyway, those kinds of decisions. Anyway, to give you the shorter version, because this is, well, let me just say I had speech therapy pretty much throughout my life. Didn't help me one whit. As Woody will tell you, I used to refer to speech pathologists as pond scum. Lightly, nothing personal, until I met Woody and I met his ilk essentially and other SLPs through the SID4 group. And you can explain what SID4 is at another time when they do the editing.
The short version is that it's a special interest groups or division as part of ASHA. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
I was totally not interested in knowing anything about stuttering. I worked very hard at just keeping it out of my life as much as I could. Not I remember when my kids were little, a new family moved in across the street and she stuttered very often, almost all the time, constantly. And I wanted nothing to do with her. I was not about to share my experience with her. I just, and I also was really surprised that everybody else on the street was so friendly to her, that she didn't hide it. And I couldn't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where my mind was. When I was in the PhD program, focused on that, my older son, who was then 17, I began noticing that, well, back up even more. I forget what exactly happened, but the professor that I was working for in the PhD program suggested I take a Gestalt weekend workshop in Cleveland because I was having some issues with a friend who had used the term gratuitous ad hominem. And I had to look it up, of course, what that meant, and just didn't understand. And so he suggested I go to the Gestalt Center in Cleveland and take a weekend workshop, which I did in 92. No, in the fall of 1990. And in that weekend workshop, I learned that I really hadn't been saying no to anybody ever. I would always go along, always do whatever, and decided that I could start saying no when I wanted to. So I started with my family, which included my 2 teenage sons, who had never heard no from me before. And suddenly there I am. You have a curfew, you got to this, blah, 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 blah. I was setting them down. And they behaved as what I now know is fairly typical adolescent boys, or adolescents anyway. And I couldn't handle it. These were not, I didn't know who I was going a little berserk. So I hauled my whole family into family therapy. My son's grades were falling through the roof. They were, whatever. The long and short of it was, we put my older son into treatment for alcoholism. My husband at the time went into outpatient rehab for alcoholism. My 15-year-old son and I got a pass, essentially. But I was told to go to Al-Anon. So I haul it off to Al-Anon. And it was, and therapy. And I wound up having weekly therapy until I moved to Philly, wound up with 4 or 5 12-step meetings a week. And during the course of that work, which I started so I could save my son, which isn't really what happens in therapy, I started to take a look at myself and came away with a much better understanding, including the need to be honest with myself about myself. And that included owning the fact that I stuttered. And I had been trying to hide it from everybody, including me, for a very long time. I took a week-long codependency retreat. And it was during that week, while I was explaining my family genogram, that in the way I used to have this odd way of speaking that worked for me, but the facilitator caught it and basically stopped me and said, "Janet, what's going on? What's really going on?" Which is a wonderful question, So I, in front of maybe 12 to 15 cohorts, I explained that I was stuttering, that I was a stutterer, and that I was trying to hide it. I had always tried to hide it. And nobody laughed. I remember expecting people to laugh at me, and nobody did. They were actually curious and interested, which was very new. And it must have been contagious, because I got curious and interested. And it was no epiphany, nothing happened overnight, but all the 12-step meetings I went to, in each one, as anybody who's ever been knows, you have to give your name going around the room. And that had always been so difficult, but here I finally had opportunity to practice and to do it in a way that nobody ever laughed. There would be a big long silence, because it would usually get stuck. And then it would eventually come out, and no big thing, it would go on to the next person. And in different 12-step meetings, you get to tell your story frequently. So because I was going to so many, I got to tell my story often. And anyway, that's when I became curious. I saw a pamphlet about Compulsive Stutterers Anonymous that Susan Reed had put together. And I called the local phone number, and that's when Amy Johnson answered, and she was involved in that. And she's the one that said, but there's an even more active group called the National Stuttering Project. And she told me about the conference coming up. And they also had monthly meetings in Cleveland. So I went to those, met some other great people through that. And, it was a process. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounded like that your journey or your process of change actually started because you had this opportunity to be involved in Al-Anon and using the 12-step program, sort of applying it to your own stuttering. And then it looked like you went into more community self-help support networks, and that your beginning of your understanding of change and your how you, because I do want to hear a lot about how you've changed your stuttering. Everybody wants to hear that because you are a comfortable stutterer. It sounds
That's a
like,
great way to put it. Thank you. Yeah,
yeah,
that's good. Yeah.
it's well, you are spontaneous and comfortable and everything that we value in arts, actually, but did not come through it through an arts therapy program, but came through it from a different road. And as Sheehan always said, there are many roads to Rome, which I love that. And it looks like you took a different one. And so I think it's so interesting that you were able to come to so many of the changes you made in terms of identity and self and openness and authenticity, came from these other directions. It's very, very interesting to me.
Those are important words. They really are. The authenticity, I mean, it started because of 12-step and those programs, because of I've thanked my son often for getting into alcohol too much, for really abusing it. And he said, "You're welcome." So he knows I talk about him, but I haven't done it in a very long time.
Was that process also because you said you had a covert profile? I'm assuming that you were concealing and masking. Um, did you at that point start going back to the people in your life and start identifying as a person who stutters, start self-disclosing, or did you just continue this journey and as it evolved, it evolved?
I didn't stay but much longer in Ohio, so it wasn't like there was a lot of people back there.
Mhm.
I moved to Philly, let's see, about 8 months maybe after that NSP convention that I went to. I moved in Philly in '94 in March. The University of Pennsylvania offered me a job in fundraising, in charge of the alumni there, and I had to use the phone a lot. I had to give a lot of talks in front of alumni. And what I found, because in the beginning I was really nervous, I was still, they're going to hear me stutter. Oh no, kind of thing. Even though, half of me wanted to, knew I needed to embrace it and blah, blah, but you put yourself in that actual situation. I was still nervous. And I discovered that if I actually explain to my listeners, I'm a person who stutters, I might stutter, don't worry, I'm not having a heart attack, just, we'll carry on. I didn't stutter. It was sort of like, it was almost a trick in a way, now that I think of it that way. I wound up disclosing so I wouldn't stutter.
Yeah,
It's
it's
funny.
all
Is that
about the
allowed?
intent, isn't it? Right?
Is
Yeah.
that allowed in arts?
Yeah,
Did I get a
yeah.
demerit?
Well, it's
So,
so interesting because you're getting to the crux of the idea of so many of the things, whether you do that, whatever you do to hide and suppress, is something that you have to look at least in terms of our therapy program. But I'm interested in what it was like for you when you first started showing stuttering to people, because when you go from being covert to overt and make that transition, there had to be a ton of reactivity that you, or either, emotional reactivity, physical reactivity, cognitive reactivity in terms of the thoughts of others. Did you go through any of that when you first started showing stuttering in the outside world?
I can't relate to that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
First of all, I didn't, my stuttering events were more silence. And I didn't even make a lot of movement. So people oftentimes had no idea what was going on. I used to think they assumed I'd forgotten my name or whatever it was I was supposed to say. It wasn't like I repeated sounds. That's how I stutter now. Sometimes when I'm talking, I'll notice that a sound will be there a couple times. And there was a phase in which I went, see, I do stutter. I told you I was a stutterer, see? Kind of in a way proud of it. Like I've always felt proud to be part of this community of people who stutter, because I find us all quite courageous in many ways. We lived for a very long time. At least I certainly did. I called it chronic stage fright at one point, that just a constant, pervasive fear that I'd be found out. And yet I went about my life. I still had a life. I got married, I had children, I had a job, but nobody really knew that inside I was scared to death that I'd be exposed. What was the question?
Well, I was curious. I think some people listening would be very curious to know. You're describing a blocking pattern that you really couldn't get anything out when you stuttered. It sounds like a silent block. Did you go through a period where you started putting sound in those blocks and actually showing stuttering? Or did it go about a different trajectory where the fear just reduced and then you stuttered less?
What I remember going through for a while, for a couple of years, was anticipating the stutter and sort of seeing it at the end of my right arm and knowing it was coming. And so it would travel up my arm. And sure enough, it would hit me in my throat. Yeah, now I'm stuttering. And then it would go on out my left arm, and out it would go. And I remember that sensation going on for a long time, years. And it was just no big thing. That, often when I would be telling my story in one of the 12-step groups or saying my name in the beginning, it was like I knew I had to say my name. There's 4 more people to go, and then it's, and it started climbing up. But it wasn't like I did something different with my mouth or anything. It was more like I just let it happen. It was gonna happen, let it happen, and then it's done and off it goes. That was more of it.
So it's, it's powerful. I'll tell you why, because so many people who are on the journey of trying to become more comfortable and spontaneous, things that you have accomplished, go through a period where they have to actively let go of control. And so it's like you're trying to control the form of stuttering. You're trying to control what other people think. You're trying to control your own feelings around it. All this control, control, control. And they want to get to the point where they let go of control. And the way you describe this, and I repeat this story to others because you've told it to me before, the way the word comes in your body and you allow it to go out of your body without it, you're releasing this control. I would love to package that up and sell it. I mean, that's beautiful, Janet.
I'd rather it become a powder that we could mix in with some warm milk and people just drink it.
But I'm not going to let this go. Did you think about doing that? How did that come about? Was that a product of Gestalt therapy? Was that a product of mindfulness? Was it a product of knowing that you needed to let go of control and that's how you figured you would do it? Or was it just Janet working something out?
It just was, because I never had the sense that I was going to fix my stuttering. I was going to accept my stuttering. I was going to always stutter. And that was the new me. I was going to be out there stuttering. And so it wasn't like I wanted to stop it or control it. It never entered my mind. It was, this is what is. And so let's accept, awareness, acceptance, and change. But I wasn't expecting the change.
So I love that. I get the awareness and acceptance. For so many, change has to be very conscious and determining what you're going to change and how you're going to change and doing assignments for change and risking change. Well, and it looked like it was so natural for you.
Gestalt has there's an article by Arnold Beisner, something like that, Beissner, I think, called The Paradoxical Theory of Change. And in it, I just embrace it fully, and I have for a very long time. It basically says that if you want to change, if you want to, lose inches off your thighs, you have to fully embrace those inches on your thighs. You have to sort of know why they're there. You have to accept that they are. You have to accept yourself as whatever, fat or, whatever. And as you do that, it's in the process of that acceptance that they kind of melt away. The reason for having the thing you wanted to change, the problem, goes away because you don't have to, you don't feed it anymore. You stop feeding it. So there was never a sense that I don't know, when Woody and I were first together, he knew he was up for a sabbatical at some point, and so he decided we were going to write a book on change. That was the goal, and so he put in for the sabbatical, and we got it. He got it, but the book on change never came about. I think we wrote Stuttering, and the little stuttering book. Sure.
I will show you that book by Woody and Janet's book, Stuttering, from my bookshelf. But so it was supposed to be a book on change.
Well, that's what we thought would be really interesting.
Yeah.
But other people, I guess the publisher had other ideas. So we wrote a book on stuttering, but we incorporated change into it.
Yeah. So I actually talk a lot about the relationship between acceptance and change and how they're partners on this journey and they can't live without each other, but they can't live with each other. Sort of this relationship is change is trying to move and acceptance isn't there yet and vice versa. What have you thought about the relationship between acceptance and change for you? And I can't get over how incredibly natural it just felt for you that the acceptance led to change. And I know I'm repeating myself here, but I'm just like fascinated with how easy it is for you. And I think that a lot of people in our network would want to bottle that up.
Make it a powder.
For the warm milk.
Yeah. I never appreciated that as much as I do now. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Change is hard for people.
Well, because they have to work. You don't have to work at it. You don't read the article and then come back, then you talk. Put it on pause.
I'm going to do it. Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
See if it doesn't inform your work with stutterers. Really.
Oh, absolutely. I know it does. It does.
Yeah.
What was your attitude, or even currently your attitude about the identity piece, about identifying as a person who stutters and taking the role of a person who stutters and letting go of false role behavior? Did you consider that and work on that, or was that part of your journey?
What informed that for me was the fact that alcoholics are always alcoholics. It doesn't matter how much they drink. If they totally stop, if they were an alcoholic, my belief system says you're always an alcoholic. And that's why they basically, watch where anyway. So I came to adopt that as once a stutterer, always a stutterer. So because I have at first I thought it was only going to be because we shared the history together, what it was like hiding it all those years. But then I realized, no, I'm always a stutterer. I still stutter. Well, at least I still have these normal disfluencies as I sort of am beginning to think of them. It's like I stutter the way Woody stutters. We do sometimes the way anybody would.
What would you say to somebody who says, Janet, I have gotten to the point where I'm okay with my identity and I really identify with being a person who stutters. I don't hide my identity, but I'm still tense. And I know that in certain situations, I'm still holding back. And there's a voice in my head that says, no, make it smaller, make it littler, make it invisible. They'll think X, I'll feel Y, What would you say to somebody? Or what do you think about somebody who's struggling with that?
Well, I would ask them what it feels like in that moment in their body. Where do they feel it? What's the label they put on those feelings? What's really going on for them in those moments? Because it sounds the conclusion I would jump to, but wouldn't express right away, is that they're still wanting to hide it. I mean, they are. They're afraid to let it out. And so, but to bring them to that recognition on their own is the most important thing. I can't tell them. Nobody, I think if some speech therapist in early on in my journey had said, you just have to accept that you're going to always stutter, there would be some sort of resistance build up. It had to come organically, at least for me anyway. Yeah.
You alluded a little bit to this notion of body work that you talked to me a little bit about. Can you talk about that and maybe the relationship to something like stuttering?
Oh, yeah. Oh, because so much of the body's involved in stuttering, so much. And the average stutterer, in my experience, me included, go numb. We tune out the body. We don't want to pay attention to what's happening. We certainly don't want to pay attention to how nervous we are or pay attention to what's happening with our tongue and our jaw and our whatever else is in there. Woody knows that stuff. I don't. You know that stuff. I don't know that stuff.
Your lived experience is something we don't have, right?
Right. Yeah. But we go numb so often. In fact, I have known a few stutterers that I would actually say dissociate in those moments. In fact, I think Woody did an article on PTSD and stuttering. Did you hear that little catch that I had right there on? I noticed
she does stutter. She does stutter. Yeah.
That's the awareness piece in our three-pronged thing. Becoming aware of what's actually going on, becoming aware of what you actually are feeling. What's the gripping in your stomach? What does that feel like? What does that look like? Let's talk to it. Gestalt's all about talking to rather than talking about. So we talk to the fist in our throat, or we talk to the stutterer. Sometimes you put the stutterer in the chair, so to speak.
I've seen you do that. Yes.
And then what I like is we talk as. I like it. We go from talking about to talking to talking as, and switch seats. And it's very powerful, and it introduces them to a different way of experiencing the event, however we want to call it, and getting in touch in an open and honest way with what's going on. Not that they have to control it, but that they have to own it. It's happening to them. Yeah.
So imagine that not everybody listening has a Gestalt psychotherapist. What might be a self-help nugget from this? Would you say that, taking this wisdom in terms of the body work and your work in Gestalt therapy, what might be the self-therapy takeaway? How can people apply this to their own journey?
Well, the Gestalt Center where I finally trained for 3 years is in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And a couple times a year, they offer an Arrive Already Loved weekend workshop that I would highly recommend. I don't have any advice to give. I really don't, except to pay attention, to pay attention, to be curious about yourself, to want to understand yourself better. I think that was that even Socrates, know thyself? I really think it's like the best advice anybody has ever given. I think it was, they put that in my high school, the yearbook people put that under my picture. So I think I must come by it naturally or something. I have no idea. Maybe it was college. I don't remember. One of the yearbooks. Know thyself, Socrates.
Yeah. I mean, there's this great emphasis on awareness, and I like that. Awareness and acceptance. In our therapy approach, we have a lot of a focus also on the doing. You have to do something. You're changed by what you do. Would you say that was important for you, that you had to do the doing too? Or do you think that it automatically, that's why I asked you about the self-help, do you think that it flowed from awareness excuse me, an acceptance, and then the change flowed, or
The
what
change, yeah,
you're doing?
you're absolutely right. The change flowed. I wasn't expecting it, but the doing is important, but not, I didn't set out to do. I went to a meeting because I needed my 12-step meetings. And there in those meetings, I had to talk. And so I had to just let myself talk and let myself be as honest and authentic in my speech as I was able to be. And so there was that constant practice that I had for over 4 years, um, over 4 years. And even after, and then when I moved to Philly, I found 12-step groups to go to. When I moved to Vermont, I found 12-step groups to go to. Didn't have any in Kazakhstan, but you know.
I, I do want to get to Peace Corps in just a minute, but I would love to just sort of finish out this topic by getting you to talk a little bit about where you are today, in terms of your relationship with your stuttering, how you, if there's life impact for you in any way, your interest in still looking at your stuttering. I mean, where do you stand now?
it you're not going to like this. I have no interest in it. I remember the day I realized I had forgotten to announce that I'm a stutterer. I was giving so many, I realized I hadn't done it, and I didn't not do it consciously. I just hadn't done it. And I haven't been to an NSA convention in a long, long time. I mean, I miss the people, although I miss the people, you know,
Yeah,
can't see them at a
yeah.
convention anymore. Yeah. So
Isn't that what it's all about, though? That the identity, once you embrace the identity, it sort of goes back into the background of all the other identities. And it only comes forth when we talk about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
you know, I made a list a while back about the different memories I had of stuttering. There's a slew of them. I have no memories of me speaking easily. They just didn't stay. You know, I don't pay attention to them, but the ones where I had a problem, the ones where I was nervous, the ones where I was humiliated, they are fixed in my mind. And it is lovely to now have other things that take up space in my memory system. It's really lovely. But
Yeah.
it wasn't because I didn't want to stutter. That's the thing. It was because I didn't care if I stuttered or not. I stopped caring. Yeah. Yeah. Ooh,
Let's
that
do
almost
that.
sounds terrible. Don't care. I don't care.
I want to just transition now to your Peace Corps days, because I think people will be really interested. How do two mature adults like you and Woody just decide that, hey, we're going to join the Peace Corps?
Well, when we were dating, I said to Woody that Lillian Carter had gone in the Peace Corps in her 60s, and it was something I was considering doing. And he agreed with me that that sounded like a lovely idea. In our 60s, we'll go in the Peace Corps, sort of thing. I should preface this by making sure you understand that when I was graduating college, a lot of my friends were going in the Peace Corps. And I wanted to really badly. That would be the right thing for me, blah, blah, blah. But I said to myself, of course, they would never take me because I stutter. And so I never applied specifically because I stuttered. So that was one of those. I forgot about that on my list. So turns out Woody and I are 10 years apart in age. And so when Woody hit his 60s, I was still in my 50s, and I wasn't planning to go in Peace Corps quite yet. Another 10 years, please. And I had just, a few months before we married, I had started a private practice. I'd graduated from the Gestalt program. And Woody would actually, he had also graduated from a Gestalt program, but he was still seeing clients as an SLP in the house. And a few of them needed more than SLP stuff. And he would basically refer some of his clients to me for deeper work, essentially. And so I eventually hung up a shingle and got a bunch of people. a lot of them came from my 12-step group that learned what I was now doing. So I had a little private practice going in my living room in Philadelphia, and I loved it. And that had been going on about 4 years by then, 4 or 5 years. And Woody and I we're down in Chincoteague one weekend. My friend Amy and her husband came out from Ohio, and Woody's 2 grandchildren were there. And we had foreign students on our 3rd floor that we would rent rooms to. They all came down. We had this huge, great group of people in our little house on Chincoteague, our little log cabin. We had a great weekend. Everybody dispersed. Goodbye. We were driving back home to Philadelphia after this great weekend. And Woody says to me in the car, I think we should look into Peace Corps. And I said, no way. There's no way. My life is absolutely fantastic right now. I have everything I've ever wanted. I love my life. There's no way I'm going in Peace Corps. And yet it had been a dream of mine at one point in my life. So he kept after. Now we have to remember Woody had retired from Temple and he wanted to teach English. So he had that in the back of his mind. And if he went in Peace Corps to teach English, he wouldn't have to do a lengthy certification process, which you would if he taught English in the States. So he kept after me for 2 weeks, just visit their website, just go and see. And I remember at one point saying, well, if I got a really nice beach, a good mattress and friendly bugs, then I'd consider it. So
I remember you saying the hair was important too.
did I?
Yes.
Well, I could not get a decent haircut there, that's for sure. You should wear long hair if you go in the Peace Corps. You can just pull it back and don't worry about it. I kept trying to get a good haircut anyway.
The funny thing that I remember, go ahead. Yeah.
So we wound up going to the world's largest landlocked country because I went to the website and just looked and just got again that fervor in me that I had felt graduating from college. I wanted to serve, and this was shortly after 9/11, and our country under George W. was going to war, and this was a kind of way we could take a stand against that. We would go in the Peace Corps. Woody said to a local newspaper that interviewed us down in Chincoteague, we're going to make friends for America. And so, we were very idealistic. So I sold my Philadelphia house. We gave up both of our practices. He'd still been seeing clients. I was able to place most of my clients with other therapists. Sold the house. And then we're just waiting for our final medical clearance and moved to Chincoteague to wait, and got the phone call from both of my sons in the same weekend that they were both expecting their firstborn babies. So we put the Peace Corps thing on hold. We put it on a shelf for like a year and waited for the babies to come and lived down there in Chincoteague for a year without. It was a really important, I think, transition in a way, because we didn't have a lot of doing. We had to be, because we didn't have our jobs, we didn't have projects, we didn't although actually Woody did have a project. He was building a boat, and he finished the boat on the porch in Chincoteague. But so we spent 17 months. We also got our medical clearance. It takes longer when you're older to get a medical clearance. There's a whole lot more history. But then we eventually went, they called us in April, exactly 20 years ago this month. They called us to say, you've been placed in Kazakhstan and you leave June 3rd. And we had never heard of Kazakhstan. And so we did some scurrying around, but we went to Kazakhstan and we both taught English, Woody at a university and me at a teacher's college.
Yeah. And what would you say, I think at this point you were pretty far along in your stuttering journey, but did you find that there was any cultural differences related to stuttering, people experiencing your stuttering or your willingness to show it, or was that just something that didn't come up?
I don't have any memories that it came up. I do know that depending on where you lived in Kazakhstan, if in the city, children with challenges were often hidden. But when we went to the village, there were lots of children with various birth defects, developmental challenges also that were part of the family and put to work. Essentially, they had chores, they had responsibilities, they were involved like any other child would be. But in the city, it often felt as though they were hiding any kind of child with a problem. And Kazakhstan had been the nuclear testing ground for the Soviet Union. I had over 45 above ground nuclear tests. And so we believe that this was some kind of result of that. We also noticed there were no birds that we could see, and they had the largest, most lethargic mosquitoes I've ever seen in my life. Those were the only bugs and houseflies. They did have houseflies, typical, normal, annoying houseflies, but really lethargic mosquitoes and children. I can think offhand of a half a dozen just immediately that had some kind of neurological challenge, neurological problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm curious where you were I know that you went there, both of you, with a focus on teaching English. I remember the books, you were looking for textbooks. I remember this period. And I'm just wondering, during those times, were you looking to see what was happening with stuttering there? Did they have a word for it? Or at that point, was your interest in a
My
different?
interest had already moved elsewhere.
Yeah.
It really had. But Woody had a former client of his find him online and wrote to him, and Woody wound up rewriting. We had a final book called Experiential Therapy for Stutterers, a whole book, and he wound up rewriting that as a self-help book for this guy and then sending it to him. So that was on my, he was doing that. He had, he's used to getting up at 4 o'clock and writing textbooks. He did that for 35, 40 years. And so suddenly in Peace Corps, he had no textbooks to write. He'd still get up at 4 o'clock. So he wrote 5 novels while he was in
Oh,
Peace
wow. Wow.
by hand, longhand.
I didn't know that. That's fabulous. That's
Yeah.
fabulous.
They've
So
since been published, I'll tell you. But anyway.
yeah, and you came back and wrote a book about your experience. Talk a little bit about that. I'm wondering also if writing, since you have written a book since that book as well, is writing a relatively newer interest in your life, or were you interested in writing during the days when you were a covert stutterer? Because I'm just trying to see if writing was a way of expressing yourself when you couldn't say everything you wanted to say when you wanted to say it. So just sort of talking about your writing trajectory.
What do you think? You're absolutely right. I was the editor of my high school and my college newspaper. I wrote, I loved writing. Oh, I was also in 6th grade, I had a science magazine that I would run off on the mimeograph machine doing that. So yes, writing is a very long standing. I like to say it started with my grandmother, who used to write me letters every week, and I would respond to her in cursive. We were learning cursive back then. Yeah. So I've been writing, and I still find it a way to help me understand things. If I'm confused, I find, and in fact, the reason I wrote the memoir At Home on the Kazakh Steppe was because I really had to understand this strange 2 years of my life that was different than anything I'd ever experienced. And what did I get from it? What did I learn from it? I had to do that through writing. It took me 7 years to come out with the book, but yeah.
Was your mission in writing At Home on the Kazakh Steppe, was your mission more for self, or did you have a message that you wanted to put out? I'm just curious if
It
you.
started for myself. It started completely, I wanted to understand. And then as people, I was in a writers group here in Vermont. And as people began listening to what I had written, they kept telling me that I would have an audience, that I could actually sell this book. Then I learned that if I wanted to sell it, it actually had to read like a novel. So I sort of had to rewrite it. So I wrote maybe 3 or 4 versions of it before it actually came out, like a novel, with tension and what if and those sorts of things. I had to feel like I maybe even had to embellish them a little to raise the tension. But I got out of it what I needed to get out of it. And the third goal of Peace Corps has 3 goals. The third goal is that when we come home, we educate Americans about the culture and the land where we lived. And so I wanted to fulfill that. Yeah.
I know you've had a lifetime of change. Did you change fundamentally, do you think, during the 2 years?
My quick answer to that is we don't bathe as often as we used to. That's what I always say. We learned the value of water, and it's not to take it lightly. It's really going to be the next oil that we all fight over. Maybe not in my lifetime, but
Yeah.
So I came back with a different appreciation of extended family than I had going in. I was more, I raised my children. I remember my main goal in raising my children was to get them to fly the nest. I thought that was it. And then they'd fly and then I'd go do something else. Now I feel a stronger desire to have extended family around me. We live in an isolated 30-acre plot up here in the mountains, but
with a yurt. You have a yurt. Yeah. So
that's right. I also have a yurt, which we rent out on Airbnb from 3 acres. FYI.
Yeah. So and then just touching on your book after that, Leapfrog, talk a little bit about your current writing and what you focus on, either through Leapfrog or through your blog. Catch us up. What are you writing about these?
Yeah. Leapfrog, I actually want to change Leapfrog and call it Flee. Or Leaf. I want to make it shorter and less dense. I think right now it's a very dense book, and I try to encourage people not to read it by themselves in one sitting. It's just too dense. Use your book club, use your local library, and gather a group of people that'll read it together weekly, 1 chapter a week, so 10 weeks. Intro and conclusion, and go through it. But I want to rewrite the A chapter, and rather than assessment, I want to make it agree, and how important it is to find something that we can agree on with people that we disagree with. We're all human beings, and to focus on that. Yeah.
I'm just going to slip the subtitle in because we didn't mention it. How to hold a civil conversation in an uncivil era. And that's a 2022 book.
Yeah.
What would you, it's so timely, I think, that you decide, this is it. But
it's fine. It's getting the will. Yeah, it is. And that's why I wrote it. I wanted to see what I needed to know in order to talk to these people that scared me. But knowing what to do and having the will to do it, or even the opportunity. I live in Vermont. I'm not really surrounded by MAGA people. I'm just not. And that's one of the problems. This book doesn't motivate anyone to do it. I don't think I'm not really happy with the book, so we have to spend a lot of time on it. That's why I want to make it into Leaf or Flee. Yeah. I'm not sure.
Yeah, a redo. We'll do a redo. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been talking a long time. I knew it would go by really fast, Janet. I knew that our time would just fly here. Is there anything that you wanted to add that we didn't talk about, or any messages you want to give either, mostly the people who are going to be listening are people who stutter and are listening to our Open Stutter channel to learn about the values of stuttering openly and, as we said, authentically, and um, allowing yourself to be who you are and say all you want when you want, um, letting go of control and worry about the evaluation of others. Is there anything that, any closing remarks you want to talk about for your personal journey?
That I don't have any responsibility for other people's reactions has been a very important lesson for me. Um, I came up with an affirmation for me early on in my codependency journey, and it was free. I'm no the word free. I'm free. I have no responsibility for others' feelings, no responsibility for others' reactions, no responsibility for others' expectations of me, and no responsibility for others' emotional state. It's all their choice, kind of thing. And that was freeing.
Yeah.
Um, it not necessarily easy, but the idea of just loving yourself, knowing that you're enough, just as you are, is to me the core. Just you're enough. You know, it's not like you speak well enough. It's not like you're thin enough. It's not like you're old enough. You're just enough. Um, and learning how to accept and love ourselves. We get that, you know, I needed the unconditional acceptance that I found in 12-step meetings with and sponsors that I got, and I've sponsored others. And that unconditional acceptance of us just as we are is powerful, is really powerful. And how they find it is where their journey is going to take them to find that.
Yeah. And I think that's a really beautiful way to end this conversation. I really loved it. Thank you so much, Janet, for finally sitting down with me and doing this talk. We've been wanting to do it for a long time, and it's really been just meaningful and fun, both of those things for me.
I'm glad. I thank you for the opportunity. It's always nice to see you.